It's the beginning of the second week of our month at Sutton Hoo. We're asking why this site was chosen to be the resting place for Anglo Saxon royalty, and whether the cemetery discovered under the Visitors Centre contains the ancestors of the warrior king buried in the famous and spectacular ship burial. Last week, we began to uncover the first signs that the cemetery stretched into the field where we're digging.
I think we could have found one of our cremation burials.
And we think we might have found the missing bottom of an important 6th century Byzantine cremation vessel, the Broomswell Bucket. This week, we're continuing to peel off the layers of complicated archaeology and expanding our search to look for settlements near the River Deben. It's week 2, and a team of volunteers has joined us in the trench. But the weather has taken a turn for the worse.
It's like November. See my breath.
Yeah, that's absolutely perfect. That's really gorgeous.
Of course, when I turn up, it starts raining. So I'm glad I brought my waterproofs. But I've got straight into the trench to help everyone cleaning it back.
The weather's making it tough, but we're finding things that look like cremations.
The real excitement over here is to see by the flag, the black area.
Yeah.
That's got 2 pieces of pottery that just pinged out of it. And you can just see little speckles of white, which are cremated bone. So it's this very scattered, very tiny little bits that's obviously from a cremation that presumably has been hit by ploughing or the service trench or something.
So you think it's disturbed?
Yeah.
There's the edge of something on there.
Yeah, there is, isn't there? Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it's nice and clear, isn't it?
Yeah, it is very clear, yes.
This is a garden field where we are now in the dome, and our trench is just next to it where the flag is. Now, you've done all...
And the GPR team have arrived to expand the search for Anglo-Saxon dwellings.
We've got the Hoos of these promontories that stick out into the valley. There's one here which has an Anglo-Saxon cemetery on. There's one over here which has another Anglo-Saxon cemetery on it. But we've got an even more prominent one just here, which apparently has nothing on it, which seems a bit weird. Was there something else there? And we were wondering about a hall. You know, so there are examples in Scandinavia at Uppsala where you've got the burials and the halls together.
We've got Swedish radar equipment. We have Andreas here, who's come all the way from Sweden just to take part in this, so he knows plenty about the Scandinavian halls and
yeah, well, he's got to find one.
Yeah,
he's not going home unless he finds a hall here.
So Simon continues to look for an Anglo-Saxon building outside Tranmer House. Although it's likely the posh hall would have been on top of the hill, the ordinary folk probably lived lower down the slopes. And one possibility is Riverview Field, where the Sutton Hoo Geofizz volunteers have been working. Unfortunately, the wooden sunken houses the Anglo-Saxons lived in don't leave much of a footprint. But what's shown up is a mysterious rectangular feature which definitely needs investigation.
Did you say we had quite a few volunteers to help us out down here by any chance? There is a couple of parallel lines coming across there. Yeah.
It's looking promising, but with the need to cover ground quickly and accessibility difficult with the cart, it's down to Jimmy to provide the horsepower.
We say Sutton Hoo. Hoo just means hill, doesn't it?
Hoo means promontory.
Yeah.
So there are promontories in a row all the way along this side of the gravel terrace. So the gravel terrace has been thrown up at the end of the Ice Age. Then the water drains off and creates these valleys, these little re-entrants. They leave us with these promontories, which are really nice places to build something. If I was a Saxon, I'd be building down opposite where we are here. That's another promontory. It's got a good view of the river, and this would be the landmark that they'd aimed for when they came up the river.
Unfortunately, it's likely that any remains of a Saxon hall might have been destroyed when Tranmer House was built.
Walking this way towards Tranmer House is really nice because we're essentially walking in the footsteps of Basil Brown, as you would have walked up from the original excavations, bringing finds to show to Edith Pretty, who lived in this magnificent house.
The house is now partly a museum.
Is that Basil's own?
Basil's tape measure, I love it. Archaeologists only.
Oh, excellent. Privileged.
Upstairs is where our finds are being processed.
And in the tradition of Basil Brown, we're storing our finds in Tranmer House as well.
Yes. Oh, there's so many.
The finds so far take us back thousands of years to Neolithic flints, Roman brooches, and fragments of Anglo Saxon vessels. And there are more finds and more features emerging as the team continue the painstaking troweling.
And you've been interested in archaeology kind of all your life, or
Yeah, ever since I was
kind
young.
of inspired you?
Ever since I was a young lad, I found 17th century clay pipe in the garden.
Yeah. That was my very first find as well, actually.
Was
As a kid, a bit of clay pipe in the garden, and that's what sparked all of this, really.
As the team make their careful progress, Dig Director Justin is trying to make sense of the orange features crisscrossing the trench.
You're seeing that orange linear coming through, which is what we think is waterspray.
Oh, right. So the ploughs are over the yellow.
Because,
okay.
we probably went to mid-20th century, so had maybe 30 years of ploughing. So everything we're seeing is normal modern ploughing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
But you can see strips of redeposited subsoil. You know, it's churning, it's pulling stuff up.
Yeah.
The area there where we think we've got a disturbed cremation is a bit strange. So it's
that
almost
black,
like,
the black area.
Dipped in with an excavator and put it back in again. It's quite odd.
On top of the difficulties of working in the sand and the changeable weather, the metal detectorists are also trying not to disturb a family of oyster catchers nesting in the middle of the field.
We've got our first piece of Saxon.
Yes, little strap end. You can just see the where the strap went in there between the two bits of metal held up by the rivet. Oh, and look, the ring and dot is going all the way down, isn't it? Either side of there. And so presumably it would have been about that long originally. It's a strap end, so it holds the weight of your belt down, and after it's come through the buckle, it lets it dangle nicely. And it dates to the 10th century, something like that, so about 300 or 400 years after our main period of early Anglo-Saxon use of the Tranmer House cemetery and the Mound cemetery, actually. So it's a long time afterwards. I mean, the Vikings are on the horizon and things, aren't they? Or really more than on the horizon.
This is a long time after we think our Anglo-Saxon warrior was buried in the Broomswell Bucket in Garden Field. Lunchtime on day 6, and Andy demonstrates the importance of working in this meticulous way.
I'm filming. What have you found?
We've narrowly avoided hitting what looks like a cremation urn, so Justin places a protective sandbag over it for Hilda to work on later. Near the middle of the field, we've got another Anglo-Saxon find.
These are brilliant, aren't they? Do you know the kind? It's got a circle in the middle and then a lozenge around the outside. And the lozenge has 2 strands, and they get extended out and turn into little knots. And they always do go this way around. They always go clockwise round. And you can see it's a brooch because we've got a hinge at one end, hinge at that end, and you can just see it's got some iron in it, and that's going to be a catch. There's a tiny bit of iron there. Wow, that is lovely. So there's quite a lot of these in East Anglia. They're known as the East Anglian series, which rather gives it away, and we tend to usually use them as an example of the first thing that's mass produced after the Romans, because we've got so many of them. They all seem to date to the 10th century, which is the date of this art style, Bora style, so it's got some Scandinavian influence, but they're absolutely always Anglo-Saxon. You don't find these outside England.
You look absolutely drenched.
Not really.
A rain shower has brought out the colours of the cremation, which Andy saved us from clobbering with the digger bucket.
You could quite easily see how it could have been missed, because
Yes.
it's just the tiniest little bit.
Yeah, and it looks to have been cut through by this kind of service trench or whatever it is.
Yeah, whatever it is, this thing that's on the geophysics that's brought us here, really. And it just shows how soft it must have been to be sliced through, like, I mean, hardly like a pot at all, more like something that's made out of, I don't know, blue tack. To me, this looks like what you'd expect for Anglo-Saxon pottery. It's low-fired, it's variable in colour.
Yeah, because crucially, we've got these little white bits of what looks like bone.
Well, that clinches it. That is definitely burnt bone. That looks as much like a burnt bone as any burnt bone I've ever seen, having been taken in by a fossil on last week. So that surely must be an early Anglo-Saxon cremation urn with an in situ tiny bit of cremation in it. So we know that the cemetery underneath the visitor centre comes at least this far, which makes it a lot bigger than we thought it was.
Where we are digging now is only, 20 yards or so away from it. Is it the same cemetery?
Yes, I'm quite sure of that. And it's a cemetery which has got three kinds of burial in. The first kind is Bronze Age burials and Bronze Age cremations in pots. So we know that they are there already, because when the Saxons came along, they could see the barrows, and at least one of them they decided to reuse, so they put their own pot in it. And then the next lot are inhumations, and they are the classic sort of difference between men and women. Some have swords and spears, and some have jewellery. And then there is the Saxon cremations, and Sutton Hoo is quite unusual in that it's using the rite of cremation quite late.
So far, we've encountered 2 cremations in the trench, and we're hoping to find some datable material to see how they fit into the timeline of the cemetery under the visitors' centre.
So I'm just cleaning up this feature. That's a possible cremation urn. We've got a scatter of pottery here, and then we've got the rim of a pot, or at least the kind of curving edge of a pot running around this side. So I'm just trying to define it a bit better. There's also bits of burnt bone, by the looks of it, kind of scattered around the place. So I'm just carefully trying to find the extent of it. It seems to have been disturbed by something coming through here, and I think the top of the pot has possibly been knocked this way, which is why you've got all these chunks here.
We've recovered a number of copper alloy fragments which could be from cremation vessels.
There's another bit of suspected bronze cremation bowl in there.
And Derek's using X-ray fluorescence to compare the chemical makeup of the original bucket to some fragments found a few years ago.
So this is from the original bucket, but it's a piece that wasn't found until 2012. It must have come off the original bucket at the time of finding, but it must be part of it because it's got the same decoration.
I think even the thickness and corrosion looks slightly different.
Yeah.
What I can tell you is they are completely different alloys. That much I can say with confidence. So the one, our fragment is around 30% copper, lots of tin, lots of lead, not much zinc, whereas the known fragment is a much cleaner alloy. It does have a lot of zinc, but not for kind of 20%, but that could be an instrumental difference.
By comparing this piece to the ones we've found in the trench, Derek reckons they come from a number of different vessels. Only one is actually part of the Broomswell bucket.
So this one I can say is bucket.
Presumably these fragments came off the bucket when it was pulled out of the ground by the plough. But Helen thinks there are signs that the bucket had been broken and repaired before it was buried.
So Helen, what's this bit you want me to look at?
The grey bit on the edge in the corner.
And what do we think
it looks like a kind of, well, it looks like solder, but I can't see why you would have solder on the bucket unless it had a break on it.
Okay, so I've got some results.
Okay.
So the body itself, the main body, is 89% copper, 10% zinc with traces of lead and some other trace elements in
that's
there.
what we're expecting.
Yeah. The lumpy bit is 15% lead, 19% tin, 58% copper, and 5.2% zinc.
Wow.
So that is very different.
That's extraordinarily different. Could that be solder?
That's a solder, yeah.
So we can say from that the bucket was broken and repaired before it went into the ground.
It's most likely a repair, I'd say, yeah.
And so maybe that's why the base isn't there anymore. Maybe the way it was pulled out of the ground meant that soldered repair failed again.
Yeah.
And so that base could be there for us to find. I mean, I've been assuming if it was all just broken up into little bits. So that's a big thing that we now know about the bucket, a big piece of its biography that we didn't know 2 minutes ago. And we've got it from a tiny little piece from your machine.
A tiny fragment.
Yeah, and we're not even in a lab. That's amazing. What a result.
If the base broke off, it might not have been dragged too far from where it was buried, and we're hoping that could be where Justin has been digging.
Well, this is the probable burial defined by the metal detector signal.
So that was the large signal?
Yeah, very large signal. So it's essentially an area like that, which has several very strong metal detector signals in it. And we've taken a grab sample of anything with cremated bone, and we're 3D'ing finds. And we still can't see anything. So we'll clean this area up after we've taken the spit off, photograph it, and do the same again.
If it's intact, the bottom of the bucket might still contain important information, such as cremated human and animal bones, as well as pyre or grave goods. A bronze hanging bowl discovered in the previous excavations included the cremated remains of a woman buried in what's known as a bustum burial, meaning that she was buried on the site of her pyre after what appears to be quite an elaborate funeral.
So we've got two graves there. One is in the bronze Bromswell bucket, and the other is in a hanging bowl. So Bromswell bucket comes from Constantinople, and the hanging bowl comes from northwest Britain. So there's something going on here. It's saying sort of maybe this person went to Constantinople, maybe the other person was on a campaign up north, and when they die, they're cremated, and then the cremated remains are put in this souvenir as a memory of how brave they were or a particularly fine excursion they had.
So presumably the implication would be that these are people who had some wealth or some status.
Well, I think so. I mean, just to unleash the imagination a little bit more, because we can't prove this quite yet, but the weapons do seem to suggest that people of Radwell's entourage, other warriors in other words, in order to win fame, did go and fight in the Byzantine army and came back with souvenirs. They came back with souvenirs like the Bromswell bucket. And they also came back with presents for their wives, who then started decking themselves out in Constantinople-type jewellery. So modelling themselves on Theodora, long earrings and necklaces, all that kind of thing. So you can imagine filling out this picture. The people in East Anglia were no yokels or locals. They were very much in contact with their modern world.
We were hoping to find signs of Anglo Saxon settlement, but unfortunately there's too much disturbance on the Hoo around Tranmer House for the Geofizz team to be able to see anything of note. But they've had more luck with the anomaly in Riverview, which has yielded some surprising results.
How big would that be?
You're looking at, that's about, that between my fingers about 20-25 metres between my fingers.
Classic size.
Everything about that screams boat, doesn't it?
Yeah. I think that's 625 AD, roughly.
Be serious for a moment. We're either looking at planks of a boat or we're looking at a series of land drains. But why are they only showing in one small area that's boat-shaped?
Join a thriving worldwide community of Time Team fans on Patreon.
Our new target is to reach 15,000 worldwide supporters on Patreon by the end of 2025. This will enable us to continue expanding the Time Team world with more digs and greater access than ever before.
We're in the middle of our second week of our month at Sutton Hoo. So far, we've found that the cemetery under the Visitors Centre is much bigger than we'd thought and has been disturbed by the service trench running through the middle.
So I'm just finishing off cleaning around the probable cremation urn. Just checking that none of this feature extends beyond the other edge of the service trench. I don't think it does. There's a few flecks of pottery, but that might just be because of the disturbance of the service trench going in.
The Geofizz team are trying to work out what caused these extraordinary GPR responses in Riverview Field.
But if you think about, what other processes happen in that kind of area?
Well, that's what we're looking for. Boat building, anything like that, fishing.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be Anglo-Saxon.
No.
I mean, if it's medieval, it's pretty exciting. If it's 18th century, it's quite exciting.
At low tide, it's possible to see wrecks of boats emerge from the River Deben, which separates Sutton Hoo from the shipbuilding town of Woodbridge. So it's not too much of a stretch to imagine there could be something relating to boat building in Riverview Field. But Angus is worried it's too far from the river.
It would be quite challenging to launch a ship from that location. You'd need to dig a big channel and get it out on a very high tide. That seems quite far back from the...
But are we not seeing old channels here?
Yes, maybe. I'm not... I'm just trying to restrain myself, really.
Yeah.
We're going to put some test pits into Riverview.
It's a beautiful setting. The test pitters are going to have a great time. I'm not going to go this game. You're doing great, mate. Keep going.
So Derek and Lawrence head down to take a peek.
That's locked, mate. First of all, what an incredible setting to have your test pits in the next couple of weeks. I'm pretty envious of the volunteers for that. I can't tell you how much I want to get out in a boat.
The field is protected from the tidal River Deben by substantial flood barriers.
After you, Lawrence. This is another big, fun, defensive flood bank that we're going up now. Oh, I think we spotted this one on the LiDAR. Now this is more like it. So we've got to ignore this big bank that's running off to our left and right here. This flood bank is stopping that interaction between the field and that area.
Could it also be causing that to build up slightly higher than it ought to be?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. But these lovely marshy bits, these interaction zones, they're great for wildlife, great for ducks, but there would have been a need for the Saxons to manage this in some form, to set up jetties, to set up launch areas and landing areas for boats, for food, for navigation. Oh, I love it.
Back in Garden Field, Justin and Hilda are collecting the disturbed remains of the first cremation we found for analysis.
Okay, and there's a bag for Jackie, which will give a fine number.
Definitely. That's really.
And Catherine Hills, a leading expert in Anglo Saxon material culture, is having a look at the pieces of pottery found inside it.
So I think that little grid could possibly be a circular grid. But you get stamps later. You get stamps on pots all the way through, occasionally, quite rarely, into the Middle Saxon period. But the thing that makes me think it might be more likely 6th century or even later is that it's got organic temper in it.
Oh, so
it's got quite a lot. You can see where the plant material has been burnt out when it was fired.
Well, that fits in perfectly with the rest of the cemetery. It is supposed to only get going in the mid-6th, so...
Well, I don't think so far this one small piece of pottery needs to contradict that chronology. But I suppose the size of the original pot, which is quite significant, does make it more likely it was from a cremation than from an inhumation.
We had been hoping to excavate some of the service trench to give us a preview into the archaeology of the field without us needing to disturb anything new, but it's narrower than we hoped.
So this is in real time?
Yeah,
So the Geofizz team are trying some different equipment to see if they can see how deep it is and if any other features are visible under the plough soils.
The service trench is showing up really clearly now, isn't it? This orange, bright orange streak here, but it's immensely narrow. Is that a problem?
It is a little bit of a problem. We can see it clearly in some places, in others it's still covered in plough furrows. But we were expecting something reasonably wide to give us a sort of preview of archaeological features that it cut. However, because it's that wide, it gives us, well, a very narrow slot to excavate.
So it'll be difficult to excavate and it'll be really difficult to see, won't it? Because how deep do you think it's going to go down?
Well, I think that we put the radar over it and the guys suggested it was another 30 centimetres down, and the detectorists aren't detecting the pipe yet.
Oof.
So it's probably at least that far down, given they're only getting occasional signals possibly off the joints in the pipe.
So you can't get a spade in it?
Yeah, but it's still going to work, isn't it? It's still going to give you sections through features.
It's nice, it's deep, because it means where it's truncated archaeology, it gives us a nice deep window, but the practicalities of digging the trench and recording those sections is a little tricky now. We know it's only that wide.
A piece of flint that I think is a piece of struck flint.
We're finding flints at every stage of the dig.
So we definitely do have artefacts in the form of scrapers,
and
but most of it is actually waste flakes. So these are not artefacts themselves, they're just the debris of what's left after you've struck a piece of flint, a core, to make an artefact like
So does that indicate people were making flint tools on site?
Yes, but currently we're not finding great concentrations of them. So we cannot say this was a working area where they were napping flint, sitting in a circle doing it.
So relatively.
So it's quite scattered.
This scatter of prehistoric finds in our trench is a few metres from the Bronze Age barrow under the visitors' centre. And John thinks there might be another in Garden Field. And now he's seen something suspicious in the trench.
Let's ignore the pipe. And actually, what did I see here? Oh. What?
We have a semicircular feature there, John.
That's a lot more interesting than a pipe. I'll give you that much. Is that real? That's...
Let me go back to the 2D again. Let's just have a quick... So it's that response down that side, that edge there. And that looks real to me.
So could this be signs of another barrow? And there seems to be yet another ring ditch halfway up the trench.
Yeah, that looks like some sort of possible pit, doesn't it? Oh, you mean there, the kind of bright white flecks?
Got the white flecks, yeah. There's been a
I might be inventing this.
No, I don't think you are.
A little bit.
It looks quite featurey, doesn't it?
Carenza has been intending to put some test pits in this field to see if our volunteers could find signs of Anglo Saxon settlement known as sunken featured buildings, which are notoriously difficult to spot. But now she's got another mystery to solve.
My thought is, could it be a dry dock where they were building a boat? And you'd love it that that was an in situ boat that wasn't finished. I think it's perhaps more likely, if it was a dry dock, then when the boat's been finished, they flooded the area, sailed the boat out into one of these old stream channels, and what's left are actually the foundations of that dry dock. So maybe gravel base, stone base on which the boat was actually built, rather than the boat itself.
From what I can see we've got in the way of manpower, we can probably do at least 10 test pits and probably a maximum of 20. And obviously with test pits, they're only a metre square, so several targets is better than just a few.
But there's a second target at the north of the field where the team have found another intriguing feature.
And you can just see hints of wall lines at the west end of this shadow.
So if you're thinking about a rectangular building with a tower at the west end that's been mostly robbed out and wasn't residential, are you thinking church?
And that's for you to find out.
So Carenza's looking for a church, a dock, a ship, Anglo-Saxon buildings, and evidence of what was happening here in prehistory. It's a good job she's got a lot of volunteers signed up.
If you'd like to see more episodes like this, you can make it happen.
Our new target is to reach 15,000 worldwide supporters on Patreon by the end of 2025. This will enable us to continue expanding the Time Team world. Enjoy front row seats for the greatest show on Earth and under it.
Join us this summer for our second season at Sutton Hoo, with extended coverage on Patreon.
Welcome to Sutton Hoo, and it's the start of week 3 here on our excavations at this iconic site. And things are starting to get busier because not only are we going to be excavating the trench, we're going to start opening up some test pits way across there down by the river. And we're going to be joined by volunteers from the National Trust and also our Patreon members as well.
In the main trench in Garden Field, we're continuing to work spit by spit towards subtle features and the source of that big metal detecting signal. Our test pitters are going to spend the next 3 days down in Riverview Field.
There are very intriguing geophysical anomalies in the field which we simply don't understand. They're either terribly exciting or terribly boring. But I think the test pits will sort us out which way.
The volunteers have come from all over the world, some further than others.
My name's Chris Fowkes and I've come all the way down from Derbyshire just to be here today.
Knoxville, Tennessee, United States of America.
I'm from Boston.
From Boston?
Yes.
So it's a long journey to make to come here.
Yes. Yeah.
All the way from Woodbridge.
Woodbridge, oh, that far? Wow.
Yeah.
You know that way to travel.
I think we're the long and the short of it.
I've got the Jaguar.
lines.
Yeah, I was climbing up Snowdon and opened up emails at the top, so I'm going to send some pictures, and I got an email saying I've been selected as a volunteer, so I was really happy.
Have that one.
Oh no!
We're putting in a line of test pits to give us an overview of what's going on in this field. They're taking in 2 interesting anomalies. In the north, a possible building with walls, and to the south, the much discussed boat or dock-like feature.
There is a very strange mark there, which looks not just boat-like, but sort of clinker-like and thwart-like. You know, it's got cross pieces as well. So whether this is a mirage or not, I don't know. What date it is, I don't know. But it's rather fascinating that it's turned up at that place. So even if it's not dated to the Sutton Hoo era. You know, somebody could easily have been building a boat down there. You go straight out into the open water from that lovely grassy slope.
We're going to have straight lines.
Yeah, we will.
We will.
Eventually, yes. I agree.
I'm in the middle of a dig in the US, so this is my week off.
This is our first 10 centimetres, so we're sieving the topsoil and we're finding lots of bits of rock, but we're just a bit worried about we don't want to miss anything, so I'm putting every little bit of flint aside.
Not only are our volunteers digging in the trench and the test pits, they're also processing the finds with Jenny Glazebrook, who was also part of the Sutton Hoo dig team in the 80s.
Weeny tiny, it might be a microlith. That would be easily lost, wouldn't it?
Yes.
They're working in Tranmer House, where the first gold items found in the ship burial were brought by Basil Brown under the guard of the gamekeeper armed with his shotgun. 263 objects of gold, garnet, silver and bronze were found in a heady 17 days. Our security is a little more relaxed, and we might not be finding gold, but we are getting some valuable nuggets to help us contribute another chapter to the story of Sutton Hoo.
That thing looks like a percussive bit. Looks like it's flaked off because it's nice and clean. Whether it is or it's just been hit by a plough, I don't know, but put it aside for somebody who knows what they're talking about to check.
Some of the finds are tantalising.
Broken off something, hasn't it?
It's too thin to be a mosaic fragment, if that's what you're thinking about.
Up at the north end in Test Pit 3, we've got a bit of everything.
That's brick or tile. That's our prize find so far that I've seen. A nice flake.
Flint flake. So we've got 10 test pits started and under excavation. It's lunchtime on day one of the test pit digging. So they're mostly only down to about 10 or 15 centimetres so far, but there's some really interesting stuff coming up. We're getting a lot of bits of worked flint actually. There's some very crude sort of roughing up stuff, but proper flakes here. And a few bits of pottery. There's a bit there I'd like to see washed, just see if that might be a bit early. It might just be stone. That's definitely pottery there. You can see it's sort of darker through the centre. I think that's probably medieval. And then there's this bit here, which I think is probably about 16th, 17th century. And there's also quite a few bits of burnt flint. So we might have a bit of prehistoric burning. Is that from a cremation? Is it from cooking? Heating stones in a pot to heat stuff up. People suggest sometimes it's to do with saunas or to do with brewing. So we've got quite a lot of possibilities, but we could do with a bit more evidence.
The first Anglo Saxons probably arrived at Sutton Hoo from the River Deben, just as prehistoric settlers might have done before them. It connects the site to the medieval town of Woodbridge and out to the sea.
We've got these littered boats all along the coastline, and they demonstrate a history of maritime interactions. We know they were making ropes in Woodbridge for boats, so we know they were building boats and making sails. And whilst the water is a divider between Woodbridge, as we know it, and the Sutton Hoo site that we're excavating, there would have been continued industry across there. And I'd be fascinated to know what's behind these flood barriers and what's in the field.
In Test Pit 11, there are signs that people have been living near the river for a very long time.
All right. So we've got a big mix of everything really at the moment. I'm just not sure if that's the rim, but it could be. So it could, but it's very worn. I mean, it could be a lot more recent. You know, it could be 18th, 19th century, 17th, 18th, 19th century. But it's so worn. I just think it might be a bit older than that. And you do get sort of largish Roman vessels. So that looks like a
little flake. But at that sort of size, that is classic sort of Mesolithic flint, so that's Middle Stone Age. And this is a classic sort of site for Mesolithic settlement because it's on the edge of water. A lot of their settlements are in sort of areas where you've got marshland, so they've got reeds they can use for thatching, you've got reed birds that you can use to hunt, you've got fishing nearby, all that sort of things.
So by the end of day one, we're already pushing the story further back than previous excavations.
Hello. Thank you. Thanks, Millie. Thanks.
We think here there is some burning here. It could possibly be a cremation because of the yellow around there, or the orange bit, but we have to dig down around the sides very carefully. But we've also found charcoal going in that direction, so we don't know what or where it is, basically.
But we're also getting hints of a post-medieval landscape.
This could be the remnants of tree roots or animal disturbance. If they are the remnants of tree roots, it's quite interesting from the natural point of view and the historic land use of the area. So although it's not an archaeological feature, it's still very, very useful when we look at the historic management of different areas. And the fact that we came across to post-medieval piece of pottery, it's all linking this level of activity to post-medieval period. So that in particular is quite a nice fragment, and it's possibly the largest piece of pottery that we found today.
And it's been quite a day for our volunteers.
So good to be here.
Yeah.
It's great. It's a lifetime opportunity.
It is.
Yeah.
In fact, for everyone involved, just being here at Sutton Hoo is a real career highlight.
I feel extremely privileged here, not only to have the chance to come and excavate at Sutton Hoo, which I've been so excited about, but actually to stay at Tranmer House, which is the house that Edith Pretty herself lived in and looked out at the mounds. And that's when she wanted the archaeologist Basil Brown and all the rest of it to come along and to excavate back in 1939. And then the amazing sunsets that we've had this evening, it's just absolutely fantastic.
One there. Another small one there.
It's day 13 and Paul's in the trench looking for the source of the big signal, which is getting louder and louder.
Very large tone there.
So what's your guess? Tractor parts? Or something interesting?
Engine block. Of a chariot.
Okay.
David's still finishing the metal detecting survey in Garden Field, while the test pits are underway down in Riverview. And the star find is a lovely flint blade.
It's not as sharp as it was, so you just make another one, or you probably make 10 to 15 of them in one go, and then you've got a handful, and then you can make some ones.
Yeah, beautiful.
The blade came from test pit 3.
It's getting quite clay. It's clayer than some of the other test pits, and it would be really interesting. We've got prehistoric settlement here from that, and if that is a Neolithic blade and it looks like it, then that's really interesting. As I say, if it was just the sort of a random bit of flake, you do sometimes find that on Anglo Saxon sites, but they're not making blades like this.
No.
But it's a whole new bit of story.
Yes, it's very exciting.
Yeah. Amazingly, the volunteers have found what appears to be the tip of a very similar Neolithic blade next door in Test Pit 2, which was positioned over John's possible church building. And on either side of that building, we're hitting heavy clay, which is slowing us down.
It is taking us way more than an hour to get through a layer because it has to all be broken up by hand.
Yeah.
And Vaughn has kindly done a test corner of our next layer, and it is entirely clay.
The clay couldn't be more different to the sand in the main trench, where the cremations are becoming easier to see against what seems to be an older buried soil surface. Excavating a cemetery is something that demands extra sensitivity.
If we find parts of a grave, we've all lost loved ones, and you think, hang on a minute, this is somebody who was loved and has died and was important, and it was a tragedy when they died, and this was one of the ways in which their community came to terms with it, and we are recovering that and making it a little bit more immortal, and that's what they would have wanted. They would have wanted to be remembered.
Yeah. The cemetery seems to be much larger than we'd thought, so Justin's decided to extend the trench to see if it continues further into the field.
So we think we have time to go for the full area that we wanted to, if you remember. So we went for a minimum area we thought we could manage, depending on ground conditions. We haven't suffered problems with lots of buried soil. We have some, but it's not really a huge problem. So now we think we've got time to extend to the full area.
We're well into the afternoon of the second day of test pitting.
Angus?
And that's, yeah. Don't know
what is that?
And inside the ship-like anomaly, we're seeing hints of an industrial past.
Got to break a bit up.
Oh no, but there is a bit broken.
Yeah, you see.
That's cool.
That is cool.
So that's what we got. I mean, we had grit and pottery from that layer.
That's where. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
out of. Okay.
You see how different it all is.
Yes.
Yours is very different in colour.
Yeah.
And it looks different. It's incredibly wet.
Yeah.
Yes.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's a kind of clayey sand. It's not sand and it's not clay. It's like
brick earth.
Brick earth. Oh, good point. Yeah.
Well, brick earth is a clay
sand. Yeah.
So are we looking at some kind of brick or clay production? The finds from the feature are sending us in all sorts of directions.
So it's a big tooth, so it's going to be at the very least cow or horse or something like that. What's really interesting about it is the colour, because it's gone that really, really dark colour. And that shows it's been in the soil for a long, long time. There was a lot of talk about an aurochs skull, which is like a giant ox, a giant cattle. And apparently there was one that was discovered during excavation, and some suggestion it might have been a ritual deposition or something somewhere the other side of the river. Now, we haven't been expecting to find anything like this, so we haven't, we need to go back to the books and find out what's turned up. But this looks very old.
Aurochs were the ancestors of cattle, thought to have been domesticated during the Neolithic period. It suggested that the skull found near Woodbridge was used during a ritual before being buried on a Neolithic trackway. The burnt flint we've been finding all over the site might date to a similar period.
The trouble is that we don't know what this stuff is. I mean, it's certainly in Neolithic pits, but we don't know if it's also modern and not interesting.
Nearer the river, eagle eyes have picked out a tiny flint.
Oh, yes.
And we've got this out
Needle
of
in
it.
a haystack.
And it's such an
urine and a spoil.
Look at that.
And it's taking our prehistoric story even further back to the Mesolithic period 9,000 years ago.
The bulb of percussion at that end. It's made a tiny, tiny little flake, and then this has been chipped away out to make it a point at that end. So you could then use it to sort of drill through something to make a hole in, really tiny, delicate hole in something, to maybe sew two bits of, processed skin or something together.
Good eye for whoever found that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's what I said.
The gaps that we have to fill are kind of Middle Bronze Age at the Mound Cemetery, and generally it is late. It's Mesolithic to early Neolithic. We can't see anything before the late Neolithic.
Well, that's really interesting, because it definitely feels that end of the Mesolithic, Neolithic, sort of 5,000-6,000 years ago, feels like that's most of what we've got going on here. And there's a lot of the other flint is, I think, later and very difficult to date. And it's a perfect sort of spot in the landscape for that, isn't it? Where you've got all the resources, you've got, the Mesolithic sites are famously water edge ones, aren't they? And you've got that sort of sense here that you've got this little tongue of raised ground where you've got the river for your fishing, you've got reeds for thatching, you've got woodland for hunting, you've got, everything there.
And this is the closest place that you can get to the river. It's without having to go through the mud.
This is a whole new chapter in the history of Sutton Hoo, going as far back as the later Mesolithic, around 7000 BC, when settlers might have been drawn to the natural resources. And centuries later, people began to make use of another resource, clay, which we're finding in so many of the test pits.
gosh, it looks like my garden. You can certainly make bricks from that. Yeah. So, 1, 2, 3, 4. Ah, okay. So that's absolutely perfect, actually.
It was supposed to be clay.
Yes, that is really nice.
Right.
In Test Pit 2, inside the northern feature, it's a totally different story. Speckles of red crag and no clay. This might be because we're looking at the infill of an old clay extraction pit dug in the 18th or 19th centuries, when we now know this field was known as Clay Field. It seems this field has changed dramatically over thousands of years.
I know, that's amazing. I think that's kind of the star find of today, isn't it?
But with just one day of test pitting to go, we've got more questions than answers. We still have no idea what's causing the strange dock-shaped anomaly, and if any of the features and finds in Riverview are anything to do with the Anglo Saxon cemetery emerging in Garden Field. Day 14 dawns, and Andy might be off to a slow start in the main trench, but the volunteers are keen to pick up where they left off in the extension.
Not a sausage. We had more in the higher levels and fewer finds in the lower levels. Generally, you'd expect the opposite.
That does seem a bit old.
The cremations appear to be cut into an earlier soil, which in turn has been disturbed by the modern plough.
We were getting some nice fresh flint waste from this area, actually. Yeah, like that. Oh, I think that might get through. Might just about get through that. Little bit of a flake, yeah.
We've had a lot of flints, so it's possible that we're actually looking at a prehistoric buried ground surface. It's the last day for our test pits.
Does it catch the light?
And the prehistoric story of Riverview is getting earlier and earlier.
Mesolithic flint. Apparently it's a complete blade. It's quite translucent.
During the Mesolithic period, between 9000 and 4000 BC, the landscape of Suffolk changed dramatically as the sea swallowed the plains and the hunter-gatherers had to move inland where they began to settle.
So this is really exciting here because we've just restarted again this morning. This test pit is at one end of that feature on the geophysics that we were sort of thinking might be a ship repairing feature, big oblong rectangular feature. The radar suggested that the anomaly was at 70 centimetres down, so we're at 60, and we've just had two bits of pottery come out of this. So we've got a rim shed here with a little bit of glaze around the top of it, which could be sort of, that looks about sort of 16th, 17th century maybe, could be late medieval. We've also got this bit with a really good shiny glaze on it there, sort of red glazed earthenware, so that's going to be sort of 16th, 17th century, perhaps into 18th. So we've actually got some dating evidence now from a layer which is getting very close to that feature on the geophysics, so we're starting to get a bit of a date from it, and maybe it was something like a dry dock that was used for repairing ships in the 16th, 17th, 18th century.
Next door, the other test pit inside the dock anomaly is telling a similar story.
We turned the lighter color here, but we're turning darker again. And we've got some kind of feature running this way.
So that's looking very gravelly with lots of stone in it there, isn't it? That's looking very silty without anything in there. So what sort of depth are you at here?
60.
Yeah, okay, so they're at 60. Your neighbours as well, the ones at the other end, not this competition, but because they're at the other end of, supposedly the other end of the same feature.
Yeah.
And they've started to get this gravel coming in, and this is very different to what we've got elsewhere. They've had a couple of bits of post-medieval pottery out of that gravel. So it would be great to get enough of it dug out to give a sporting chance of seeing if you get any datable finds out of this as well. But we've also got then the question, well, the fill is what that's the time at which it was filled in.
Yes.
Which is going to be obviously later than the date at which it was dug.
Right.
But we don't know how much later.
Yeah.
It could have been dug 100 years before that, just 200 years before that, 10 days before that, you know. So.
As ever, we need something datable from the feature itself if we're going to work out what it is. Up the hill in the garden field, the team are working at the east end of the trench near the visitors' centre to establish how much of the cremation in the 6th century urn remains where it was buried.
So I'm not digging it up, I'm just defining it.
And there's another urn in the side of the trench.
With bits of metal in there as well, as you can see some greenish copper alloy in there. It's very, very exciting.
Back down in the test pits, there's some excitement because we may have the first hint of a post hole from a wooden building.
So that looks like a bit of medieval pottery. It's got a sort of clay with a sandy sort of temper, that rim shape, the little sort of ledge putting a lid on effectively. The really exciting thing about that is it's come out the edge of this feature, which if it is a cut feature, then that gives us some dating for it. Do you think you've got an edge to it?
That feels decidedly different from
But a bit
inside.
further down, does it feel like
Does it keep going?
does it go on being soft as you go, you know, do you get that hard side of it coming in at depth?
Yeah, it feels like it so far.
So could this be from a medieval building or maybe something even earlier? And in test pit 12, we've finally got something Anglo-Saxon.
Yeah, that's that flake we found right off the bat this morning.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was just washing this.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Right? I mean, it's just, and there's a bit of grit. It's screaming, you know.
Now that is the one bit I've seen so far that looks a bit like Ipswich ware.
Really?
Yeah, which is the sort of, it's just immediately late in the ship period, but pretty much the same day. I mean, I could be wrong, but immediately looking at that, it looks like, it could just be medieval. Again, we need to get a pottery specialist on all of this.
There's a very good reason to be hopeful that there might be Anglo-Saxon settlement, or something, because on the foreshore at low tide, it's just possible to make out the remains of some early wooden structures that have almost vanished.
Well, this site was identified about 20 years ago, I think, by one of the archaeology units who was doing a survey of the Suffolk coast, and they spotted this arrangement of timbers where you had horizontal timbers and vertical timbers making a kind of landing stage. There are some nice examples of prehistoric trackways made in this way in Finland. So it was obviously an interesting site, but we didn't know what date it was, so we put together a little project which included some carbon dating, which dated it to the Anglo-Saxon period, but earlier than the mounds. So it's sort of it was the first early Saxon site we'd found at Sutton Hoo.
Anglo-Saxons were clearly using this foreshore at the same time as they were burying their dead in the cemetery in Garden Field, where Justin is getting closer and closer to whatever is giving off that signal.
So there we are. Very, very thin, slightly curving sheet bronze.
This fragment looks very similar to the fragments that have come from the Broomswell bucket.
So it seems to be an edge like that. It seems to correspond with what we get off the pinpointer.
It's becoming increasingly likely that this really is the base of the bucket, and if so, we'll need to bring in conservators to help lift it. And there's another area of burning next door to the bucket.
See the sudden change in colour?
Back in Riverview, we've finished up in test pits 1 and 3 and redeployed the team to put in another at the lowest point of the site.
So that's another nice blade that we've got turning up. So we've got that sense again, that sort of Neolithic, probably Neolithic use of the landscape, but obviously it's all mixed up, so you've got bits of glass in it as well. And that's a nice flake. That's a bit ropier though. I'm just wondering if there's something sort of Bronze Age later going on here, because there seem to be two very distinctly different qualities of the flint work, really.
And we've put in another test pit at the highest point, where some Roman finds were discovered in previous years.
That's fired roof tile, not modern. So, you know, it could be medieval, could be post-medieval. What's it like to sieve?
Easy.
Unbelievably easy. Beautiful view. I mean, this is just... But actually, I mean, the view is quite an interesting point in its own right, in fact, because actually that kind of aesthetic sighting in the landscape, you know, this would be a nice place to have a settlement that gets you above the immediately floodable area. And we've seen how floodable the area is from all the sort of silty deposits down there. Yet you've got all the resources at your fingertips and you've got an uplifting view.
By the end of the day, we've had finds from prehistory to modern day, but nothing Roman. Inside the northern feature, our best guess is that we're seeing clay extraction from the 17th and 18th century clay pit. But we're still none the wiser about the possible dock where we've hit water.
Striking water was exceptional. That was really neat. We were hoping to find a ship, but you know, we thought maybe we could find some boats, but
You never know. It's probably about 2 centimetres.
it might be.
Although our test pits are finished, we'll continue our investigations in Riverview next week.
What we've got here now behind me are all the finds that are coming in from the trench, and these are all the finds that we found during our test pit survey. These are all going to be processed now to help us further understand the story of Sutton Hoo.
Our volunteers have become the latest in a long line going back to the 1939 excavation of the ship burial. Many of the team who worked with Martin in the 1980s have returned to take a trip down memory lane.
So the first thing people have to learn is how to work in a team, and it's a rather strange kind of job because you're working outdoors, you never have enough money, and the very first thing is to get used to being with a crowd of people, living in porta cabins, tents, using L-sands, all this kind of thing. And then you can concentrate, once you've got over that, you can concentrate on the scientific exercise that we do.
Some haven't been back since the excavations.
Yeah, so which means that the fire would have been here. So if we'd all like to sit down in a circle and sing a few rousing choruses of Bella Ciao, we'll be back where we were 35 years ago.
We've been lucky to have so many of the 1980s team bring their experience of the site to our dig, as we mark some important milestones in the history of archaeology at Sutton Hoo.
We do need to remember that although this is the 40th anniversary of our excavations, if you like, the foundation of this society, it is the 85th anniversary of the excavations in 1939, which of course has spurred all our activities since then.
And we're all on tenterhooks to find out whether we've found the rest of the Broomswell bucket and how it fits into the story of Sutton Hoo as it transformed from prehistoric settlement to royal burial ground.